Welcome to the Neurodiversity and Higher Education podcast. My name is Ryan Palm, and I am the Executive Director of the Brad McGarry Center for Neurodiversity at Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania. I'm joined by some amazing students from our program who are helping with the behind-the-scenes elements of this production. This podcast aims to be a resource for those who are interested in the intersection between neurodiversity and higher education. Whether you are a prospective student, family member, family of a student, or someone working within the sector, we're glad you are here. Over the coming months, we will bring on a variety of thought leaders on topics relating to neurodiversity and higher education, with a particular emphasis on the transition into higher education and the transition from higher education into the workforce. We very much value your feedback and suggestions on topics, speakers, or thoughts on our episodes. We can be reached via email through neurodiversity@mercyhurst.edu, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. We'll also put information about how to connect in the show notes for each episode, and we'll talk more about how to stay engaged later on in this episode. Today we welcome Dr. Chelsea Stinnett, the Manager for Technical Assistance and Training at ThinkCollege, an organization that provides resources, technical assistance, and training related to college options for students with intellectual disability, and manages the only national listing of college programs for students with intellectual disabilities in the United States. Dr. Stinnett has been a faculty member, program director, and researcher, truly having experience in all roles within higher education, and uses this breadth of experience to help support over 360 programs across the country. In this episode, Dr. Stinnett gives an overview of Inclusive Post-Secondary Education Programs, or IPSE. You'll hear us refer to frequently. That's IPSE as an acronym. She'll also provide background on ThinkCollege, and she'll close by offering some very specific tips for students and their families who are interested in the IPSE world. Without any further delay, let's welcome Dr. Chelsea Stinnett to the Neurodiversity and Higher Education podcast. And thank you so much, Dr. Stinnett, for joining us on the Neurodiversity and Higher Education podcast.
Happy to be here.
So I think it's really helpful in a conversation like this to start with a little bit about yourself. We'll talk all about the organization and the students we serve and all those different pieces, but can you give me a little background on, kind of who you are and how you got into your current role?
Definitely, Ryan. So I am the Manager for Technical Assistance and Training for ThinkCollege, which is housed at the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Within that role, I support federally funded model programs for students with intellectual disability within higher education. I also support the many different people who are invested in more quality options for people with intellectual disability across the country, whether that's family members, counselors, transition professionals, faculty, etc. But before all that, I was first and foremost, the most important part of my identity is as a college student with a disability myself. So went through higher education with an undiagnosed disability, was not diagnosed until later on in life, and definitely call upon that experience a lot as I seek to serve families and students. But I've been everything from a peer mentor in a program that we're going to discuss today, Inclusive Post-Secondary Education, or IPSE, for students with intellectual disability. Anywhere from a peer mentor all the way up to a director, professor, faculty member, and researcher within that field. So have served in a variety of roles for 10 years now, which is wild to think about. And now currently serve in my role with ThinkCollege and helping other professionals develop in the field, develop at large.
That's awesome. So the TLDR version of that is you are the guru in this space to talk about inclusive post-secondary programs, and I'm excited for our conversation today. So, here at Mercyhurst where I work, we are a degree-seeking program, but we have a fair number of families that, kind of knock on our door and ask questions, and they may be better intended for, the IPSE route. And so I think maybe if families are in that boat, right, they've heard this IPSE term, or they know there's some programs where it may be certificate-based versus degree-based. I think it's a brand new concept for lots and lots of families. So let's start from square one. Can you give me the broad overview of what is inclusive post-secondary education, and then maybe how it might differ from some of the more traditional paths towards higher ed?
Definitely. So inclusive post-secondary education, or IPSE, is what we use to refer to the field at large. Individual programs, post-secondary education programs for students with intellectual disability, they're traditionally non-degree seeking programs on college campuses across the country. We have over 360 programs that fit this definition that are located within our college search directory at thinkcollege.net. And really, these programs seek to provide students with a natural progression within their own career and personal development and giving them an opportunity to attend college. So we know when we went away to college, there was so much more than just who we were becoming as professionals, right? It was who we were becoming as humans and developing our own autonomy and agency. And that's no different for students with intellectual disabilities. So the goal of these programs is to equip students with experience, rigorous experience, and building their skills towards their own personal and professional goals for their future after college. These programs differ from degree-seeking programs in that there's usually separate admissions, eligibility requirements, process, et cetera, that really look at instead of the traditional academic requirements of a GPA or an ACT or SAT score, these admissions panels and processes are really looking for students who can communicate why they feel college would better meet their needs for their future. So, being able to articulate, not necessarily in the most polished way, right? Because we know that this experience is necessary for students with intellectual disability to develop those skills, but being able to clearly communicate why this experience is going to better them ultimately in the end towards competitive and meaningful employment and living the life that they want to live in their community after college with the degree of independence that they desire. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of the difference. It's a separate admissions process, it's traditionally non degree seeking students. But again, I can't stress enough the amount of rigor and expectation that exists within these programs despite being non degree programs.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. And I think we're going to unpack a bunch of those different pieces of the programming today in our conversation. But the very first word in the phrase IPSE, inclusive or inclusion, would you talk just a little bit about how does inclusion matter for students across the campuses? And I probably should start with the fact that many of the answers you give are probably going to be highly variable from campus to campus and program to program, but there's probably some commonalities. And so I'd love if you could talk about, what does inclusion look like for these students?
Yeah, I appreciate that distinction. It does vary significantly from program to program, but largely what I'll say is students with intellectual disability historically are coming from self contained classrooms in high school. So these are students who, not all, but many, were served in separate classrooms in the back of the school with different expectations or different experiences than their peers in high school. These programs facilitate not just practicing what it means to be independent or practicing what it means to be on a college campus. You are independent. You are living and operating on a college campus. And so, inclusion within our world of inclusive post secondary education is really looking at how we successfully and meaningfully integrate students with intellectual disability into college classrooms. So, taking courses either for credit or for audit that are available to any student on campus with the same expectations, albeit they may be accommodated or modified curriculum within those courses. Students are living and learning on campus. So, when there are residential options available, students are living independently or interdependently as possible in the dorms. They're joining clubs, they're leading clubs. We have several students across the country that we can point to who are leaders, whether they started their own club or organization, presidents of student government, student athletes that are able to participate in some of the Division III athletic programs for non-degree students. So it looks like any other college student's experience, really, and that's what we're trying to hit home is this isn't a special education classroom within a college setting. This isn't, a big pointed neon arrow towards students with intellectual disability on campus saying, "Hey, we're different. Treat us any differently." The way I would describe it is how you would describe college for any other student, whether they have a disability or an intellectual disability or not.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate that, and it's framed so well. And I have the opportunity to connect with quite a few colleagues across the country who work in inclusive programs, and they very much are enabling students to live their best lives in the college setting, which is such a wonderful experience. And I just give them all the credit in the world for creating that experience. And for many students, I think it is that big transition. And we even see this in some of the students that we serve in our degree seeking program that if you come from a highly structured, supported program, or maybe a high school that, facilitates, students who learn differently, it can be this major leap and this major transition into something quite different. And so this leads me to a question I wasn't planning on asking, but I think when you look at the map of, colleges and universities that have inclusive programs, there's a lot of really big schools on that list that may be a very overwhelming transition point for for a student who goes from a highly structured supported learning environment to a big university like a Clemson University or something along those lines. I would assume that many of these programs play a very strong role in helping the student transition into that college setting, like literally from orientations and day ones, and what does that look like? Am I correct in that assumption?
You are correct, and I would like to say that most of our programs that are doing this and doing this well are really following the structure and the precedents in which higher education has really set that standard. So, I used to work at the University of South Carolina, which is like the mecca of first year experience, and I looked at what we were doing as a university and I looked at what we were doing as a program, and they were no different. So, I think what we've done within higher education, we've done a really good job at identifying how are we exceptionally and effectively preparing students to make that transition to college life? And then how do we structure as individual programs those additional support and orientation opportunities to look at the individual needs of our students, whether it's a program for students with intellectual disability, autism, first generation college students? I guess what I'm getting at is I'm giving kind of all the glory to higher education in general because I think it's something that we do well. And a benefit of these programs, students may not have had the opportunity to experience. I do a lot of research within like student development theory and why higher education is so impactful into an individual's life. And our students with intellectual disability wouldn't be able to have that life changing experience without these opportunities. So I really, really defer to and honor what we've done as a field in general within higher education. And then I just say, we're further looking at how we individualize the needs of students within individual programs.
Yeah, that's really great. And I think it aligns well with a lot of the best practices, certainly that I've seen, in all programming supporting neurodivergent students, in that sometimes there's that little bit of extra that can be layered on top of or in addition to the mainstream programming for all students. And so, here at Mercyhurst, we have students in our autism support program come back a day or two early, and we have some focused support opportunities there. And then the students jump right into the traditional orientation process that everybody is part of. And sometimes that little bit of extra, kind of gradual welcome can be a major, major difference for the student. So I very much appreciate that. So I think you've already alluded to this a little bit, but I think it'd be worth unpacking. When we talk about what is the goal of the programming for students, I would guess that probably varies widely from student to student and institution to institution. But can you talk a little bit about what may be some of the broad goals that a student is after through this experience in terms of what comes next after their college experience?
Yeah, so I think a goal for anybody who attends college is obviously to obtain the professional advancement that they would like. So that's no different for inclusive post-secondary ed. We have students who, the goal of attending these programs at large is competitive and meaningful employment because we know that facilitates other aspects of life that our students that contributes to their overall quality of life, like living interdependently, being meaningfully engaged within their community where they choose to live after college, and working academically and developing some of those skills and independence within those skills that they didn't necessarily get that experience within their high school setting. And so it's no different for these students. I would say that a critical component of inclusive post-secondary ed is what we refer to as person-centered planning. Each program has a process for some, as you spoke to the variability of programming that exists, but each program has a component of person-centered planning, and that's really where the student for the first time in their life is in charge of making decisions that really dictates what their educational experience is going to be like, what they want to prioritize when they're in college, and helps leverage their support system, their parents, their friends, their family members, in a way that they are at the table to engage in conversation and offer support. We call it supported decision making, but really it's students in the driver's seat choosing their program of study, choosing which internships they want to pursue that ultimately lead to, again, that personal and professional growth that they'd like to achieve.
Yeah, that's great. That's so well said, and I think it's definitely a topic I speak with a lot of families about when you talk about that transition to higher ed. Is that student goes from sometimes not even being at the table for decision making, but now they're not only at the table, they're the decider at the table, right? They hopefully have some support resources around them to understand the options, but at the end of the day, it's the student who decides the major course of study. It's the student who needs to say, yes, I want to participate in that internship or that work experience. And that can be a very different transition point for a lot of our students. And I think we were talking before we hit record that oftentimes when we're speaking with families and students interested in, post-secondary education, it's the families that are often driving the boat more than the students. The students come along for the tours and they are interested and some ask good questions, but at least in my experience, the majority of questions come from the families, and we want to see more and more students asking those questions, right? Like, what do you want to know about? What do you care about? Why does this interest you or disinterest you? And I think you articulated that really, really well.
I think one of the things that I'll just add to that, though, is that what we've learned and what we continue to acknowledge is the role and the support we need to provide family members. Within higher education, it's kind of like a hands-off world of family members. It's just how we've operated forever. And I think what we're realizing is that, we are one stop on the way of a long journey to support a student with a disability. And the more work we can do to embrace the needs of family members to help empower them to teach their student and move from that place of decision maker to support team member. I think we have long recognized the value that family members play and being a partner through this process rather than pushing them away from the table or neglecting their own training and support needs during this transition. So that's all I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, that's really well said. I feel like we could probably spend another half an hour talking about just that topic, and the way we support and work with families and support programming at the higher ed level is really an interesting topic. Would you be willing to share, are there any indicators that you think a student may thrive in an inclusive environment versus maybe a more traditional degree-seeking environment if they're kind of torn between those two options?
We do have students that straddle the line historically, and if you wanted to receive federal funding to attend an inclusive post-secondary education program, you would have to have an actual diagnosis of an intellectual disability. But that's not to say that we don't have, I think of the estimated 8,000 students we currently estimate are enrolled in inclusive post-secondary education, about a quarter of them have an autism diagnosis as well. And so there can be some confusion around, which program is right for me. Beyond that, we also don't want to exclude people with intellectual disability from pursuing a degree opportunity if they have the skill set already to do that. Um, what we like to do, I love the appreciation and the surge of community and technical college attendance that we've seen over the past decade. I think that it does amazing things, especially for people with disabilities, especially for people with intellectual disability. And what I always recommend to family members, if they feel they are straddling that line or they don't really know, hey, is this the right next step, is to consider applying, enrolling in a community college course just to see. It's pretty cost effective usually, open enrollment institutions. And so I often recommend that they pursue that route just to see how a student performs academically, to see if that might be an option in the future. We see more degree seeking opportunities for students with intellectual disability in smaller institutions or in like small liberal arts college institutions. And I think that just naturally comes from a place of, having a small community, a faculty who knows students a little bit more intimately. And so we see those opportunities for students at those smaller institutions, but we've yet to see the same movement or acceptance within more like R2 Carnegie unit institutions. And so, again, I would suggest to any student or family member, hey, try a community college course and just see if academically that student is able, not that mom and dad are able to support that student in passing that course, but truly allowing the student to prove what academic skills they have and what skills they need to develop. And if anything, I feel like the data, like the self-awareness that would come from that experience would help a student be so much more effective during the admissions interview process to say, here is where I feel I need academic support if I wanted to be successful in this kind of program.
I love that. And we certainly are seeing, I think, an increase in the number of students who are applying towards our programs who have taken some community college courses in that, gap year concept. I love when we get the chance to ask that student, like, tell me about that class. What did you enjoy? What didn't you enjoy? What went well? Maybe what didn't go well? And ideally, what did you learn from that experience that you can take with you if you did decide to join our program, right? Which is very similar to the types of interview questions they're going to face at the end of their college career of, what did you learn from that internship that will take you into your actual job, right? I feel like it's just building a really good base of skills, and it's a chance to keep the mind sharp, to keep that motivation going without maybe the huge hurdle of jumping right into a program right after high school. So I think it's a wonderful point, and community college has been, is more accessible now than it's ever been, and I think that's a very valuable opportunity for so many students. So that's really good. So we've been talking kind of high level about what the programs are, but I wondered if we could get granular and talk, could you give me an example of what a typical day or a week might look like for a student who's in an IPSE program?
Yeah, again, the variability is significant in terms of the type of program a student attends, and the programming and support that's offered. I would say that for most programs, it looks like any other student's day. And that is a big transition for our students who are coming from, a more segregated but also scheduled day where they attend a class from first period to seventh period, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And that's not the case. Students who attend post-secondary education programs have variable schedules where hopefully they are working the system and they don't have class on Friday, or at least not until noon on Friday, but it looks like any other college student's day. I will say that these programs exist for a reason. They are different. It would be unfair for me to say it looks exactly like any other college student. And that's the beauty of these programs, that we provide additional support for students to be able to navigate certain scenarios. So, interspersed between taking traditional college courses are likely some, academic study labs, meeting with your employment coach, working at your internship. And so, I don't want to say it's not highly structured. There are some programs that provide a lot of structure and supervision. There are programs that don't provide any additional structure or supervision than any other type of college program. But I will say those supports and services that our programs are charged with providing, they're provided in some way, shape, or form throughout a student's day, in addition to, what any other college student is doing, attending class, going to clubs and organizations, going to sporting events, what have you. And so just think of it as a traditional college student experience. But, and additionally, we have meeting with oftentimes peer support coaches, professional staff who are supporting students and working towards their employment goals. So those meetings are interspersed throughout a student's day as well.
Yeah, that's really great. I often have that conversation with prospective students and their families about the difference in the schedule from the high school setting to the college setting. And it's drastically different. And there's a lot more flexibility and freedom. And when you tell a high school senior, like, this is how many minutes you actually sit in a classroom in in a college setting. It seems so small, right? But what you don't realize is all the work you have to do outside of the classroom. And then if you are in a support program, the extra things that are available to you, some of which are maybe required and some of which maybe are not, but that will make your experience all the more valuable and hopefully successful if you take advantage of those opportunities. So that was a really great explanation. I would love if you could share maybe if there are some misconceptions about IPSE programs that, folks who are just diving into the space may have, made a quick assumption on, and it would be a good chance to dispel some of those misconceptions.
Yeah, I think the biggest misconception is that a student who is pursuing a non-degree program of study, like those, a majority of those students enrolled in inclusive post-secondary education, aren't having a meaningful or rigorous college experience. And I can tell you that that is not the case. Most of what we're doing as a field, as ThinkCollege, which is the national coordinating center for our model demonstration programs, is promoting the value of a non-degree credential that these programs employ. So developing a program of study, very rigorous expectations around the number of internship hours, the number of contact hours with peer tutors, social tutors. The expectations and requirements of these students are often even higher than other students on campus, just because the infrastructure and support system has been developed so uniquely and extensively to help support these students that the expectation of attendance and utilizing those supports is high. So for anybody who wants to come at us and say, what is this? What is the value of this? That's where we as a field need to do our best job at equipping our students and being able to articulate, while this was a non-degree program, let me tell you about the 500 required internship and employment hours I had to fulfill each semester. Let me tell you about the same test and assignment I had to do for my course that every other student had to do, albeit with some accommodations and modification. Anyone who tries to argue that this is not a rigorous or meaningful experience, that's the first myth that I would like to dispel. And the second biggest one is that, this is a field that we could do without. This is an extra or a luxury, or we have students who, based on our data at the national level of our model demonstration programs, the average employment rate for a person with an intellectual disability when they graduate high school is, it's waffling back and forth, but largely between 17 to 21% of those individuals are employed. Whereas people who graduate and exit 1 year after exiting a post-secondary education program, again, those model demonstration sites, we're seeing employment rates in the low 60s to high 60s. And so the impact of these programs on the lives of people with intellectual disability, it cannot be ignored. We have longitudinal data that supports that. And so anyone who says or thinks that this is just a luxury that hopefully people can use to get away from their parents and kind of go and have a great time, that is not this. This is changing people's lives.
No, that's incredible. I appreciate you sharing some data. I think back to, I've had the chance to attend the Council for Exceptional Children has a division on autism and disabilities. I'm not sure exactly on the title, but DADD is the acronym, and they have an annual conference in January. And I remember going both the times I've gone and really having the chance to hear from leaders of, IPSE programs, really go in depth on the employment support piece and taking feverish notes about like, wow, we can implement so many of these pieces within our own efforts for our degree seeking students. And so I think that the intentionality that is there amongst those programs that do it well is something for all of higher education to model after. And then I think, the students in these programs are really lucky to have that opportunity to really develop those enhanced skills that their peers on a campus just probably don't have the experience to develop. So I think that's wonderful. You've talked about ThinkCollege a couple times, but let's take maybe a couple more minutes to talk about that. What does the organization do high level? Why should a prospective student and their family, care about that? And I think most of all, like knowing that it really gives a true legitimacy and base of best practice for the programs that are coming along, because I think in some ways it might be easy to stand up a program and see it as a revenue generator, but there's so much that goes into that. So those are lots of things I'd love for you to cover in your brief explanation of ThinkCollege.
Yeah, I'll try to be as brief as possible, but it's my favorite topic, so I will try to be brief. But so we've existed for quite some time, even before we were federally funded. So currently we are federally funded through the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Postsecondary Education, to support our model demonstration sites, or TIPSID sites is the acronym. But then we're charged with doing other things like, supporting different stakeholders, families, students, faculty, et cetera. So we just got a fourth round funding. So it's a 5-year grant cycle. We just got funded for 2025 to 2030. So we'll be around for 5 more years, but that's just as the National Coordinating Center. Beyond that, ThinkCollege is an organization that supports anyone who is interested in advancing opportunity for people with intellectual disability within higher education. The founders of ThinkCollege, we really, talk about them as like the OG folks who started ThinkCollege. That was Deb Hart, Dr. Meg Griggle, and Kate Weir. And they have been at this work since really the early 90s. We had our first survey of we got some funding in, I believe, 2006 maybe, to do a survey, or 2009, a survey of how many programs existed across the country. And at the time, they were able to identify about 120 programs. Now we have over 360 programs that exist, but ThinkCollege has been there all along, developing best practice and standards. We've helped develop our accreditation process within the field. We provide technical assistance and support to emerging programs who've been open for the past 25 years, but now have to make some changes to their programming in order to meet federal guidelines or requirements for accreditation. So we are like the one-stop shop nationally of supporting anyone who wants to learn about inclusive post-secondary ed programming, providing support for developing programs through our contracted services. So we provide consulting services for folks who want to develop programs, but we also are federally funded to provide that support to a degree for free. So we encourage anybody to reach out and say, hey, here's what I want to do. And we'll tell you what we're able to provide, or what resources out of our thousands of resources we have in our resource library, and what you're able to access for free, what we could provide you on a consulting basis, and then our primary charge of working with our federally funded program. So that's kind of in a nutshell who we are and what we do. Obviously, as researchers, we contribute to the development of the field through research. As individuals, our evaluation and data team, they collect all of the resources and data from our federally funded sites. And then our knowledge translation and dissemination team, they have a very strong presence on social media and through our website to help disseminate those best practices across the country.
That's brilliant. I've referred so many people to the ThinkCollege website as a great resource, and I think it's beautiful, it's simple, it's complex all at the same time. And I think just hearing the depth of staff that you have and the expertise that you bring, and I talk about it very often with our program, and I think it's even more applicable to ThinkCollege and the programming you serve, is that just creating opportunity for students who want to pursue the path of higher education to find a door to go through to do that. And it is an overwhelming and challenging environment. And that's why, this podcast exists, right? To try and help provide some information in terms of, where do I start? And I think that Think College is such a great front door. And I very frequently talk about Think College and the College Autism Network as being these two best places to start. If you start on down either one of those routes, you're probably going to end up in a really good spot. And you might end up with more questions than you started, but you'll find a lot of resources to help answer some of those questions and some really good people to connect to learn along the way as well, which I think is really, really valuable. So I that was a terrific explanation.
Definitely. We also, just one shout out to our website. We've got a webinar we did with Dr. Burnett Williams, and we did the distinction between the two types of programs. So that lives on our website. We would love for anybody to view that if they feel like they're like, where do I fit? So those can Think College partnership resources are available.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely do my best to link to that in our show notes, as well as some other resources that you've mentioned here today. You've been so kind with your time. I wonder if you would be just kind of off the cuff willing to share what you think higher education might look like in 10 years for neurodivergent learners, and including those with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Yeah. So, I really see and appreciate the amount of programming that has developed over the past even 10 years to support anyone with an intellectual or developmental disability within higher education. I don't see that stopping with the increasing numbers of people who have been identified as someone with autism or intellectual disability. I think we are only going to have to look at systems and how we develop and change systems to accommodate the growing number of people enrolled in higher education with those diagnoses and that lived experience. I believe that we will see more and more development of support and programs specifically at community and technical colleges, specifically geared towards supporting students in obtaining industry recognized credentials. And so I think as we see the value of those growing in general within the workforce, we will have to work with when I look at community and technical colleges and trades, they haven't necessarily been on the forefront of employing universal design or working with people with intellectual or developmental disability. And so it's not for lack of desire, it's just for lack of training. And so I hope that we're able to provide them with the support as they see the growing number of enrollment of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities within career and technical education. And again, the obtainment of and pursuit of those industry recognized credentials, I think that's only going to grow.
Yeah, that's really well said. That's a space I find fascinating, that the credentialing world, and I'm sure you do as well, and probably spend a fair bit of your time reading, best practice in that space. And I think there's so many opportunities for students and our programs to be, aligning to those credential pathways and what that looks like. So maybe we'll have a whole other conversation on that some other time. Before we close, I wondered if you might just give, your top tips for prospective students and their families who are listening to this. They're intrigued. They obviously go to Think College website is the first tip, but beyond that, like how should they, think about moving forward with their searching?
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head. ThinkCollege.net is definitely where you should start. But I would say, unfortunately, our parents and students are learning about this opportunity very late in the game. When we talk to our students and our young people traditionally about college, I remember my mother-in-law asking my 2-year-old son, like, where are you going to go to college? Are you going to go to college where mom went or where dad went? For some reason, when a student has a diagnosis when they're young, it's like we stop having those conversations. We stop thinking very intently about, we almost exclude them before it's even an opportunity for them to start thinking. So talk about college. From day one, talk about college. And if college is not the route they want to pursue, that's fine too. But always keep the door open for that opportunity. Learn as much as you can, as often as you can. Share with other parents. Talk to other parents. We have Think College Families group on Facebook with close to 4,000 family members, where family members, including parents and students, can talk to other family members and students about their experience, why they made the decision that they made, the most effective questions to ask during the interview process. Visit when you can. I know that can be hard to do with work schedules and life, but go see it and experience it. Talk to other students and families who've been to that program, and really just sit down and think about, what is it that you want? And how do you articulate and find something that checks all those boxes? The right amount of support for you, the right amount of documentation and communication to your support team members. Whatever means the most to you and your family, finding a program that aligns with that is going to be important. And our college search directory really helps facilitate that.
That was wonderful. That's a lot of really good tips and resources we'll do our best to include in the show notes. This has been wonderful, a great high-level overview, some actionable advice, and just a lot of context that I think will help many of the families who hopefully are listening to this early in their journey, right? That family of a high school freshman, sophomore, junior who are, really starting to think of what that process looks like. And there's a lot of good places to start. There's many good people to connect with. And you and the team at ThinkCollege are certainly very at the top of that list. So I'm really grateful for your time today. And we look forward to staying in touch and collaborating further.
Of course. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Neurodiversity and Higher Education podcast. We are grateful for you joining us. If you haven't already, please be sure to check out our past episodes. And we would appreciate if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help us reach more people interested in this topic. We hope you will also subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to tell a friend. As always, a special thanks to Jack and Gia for their support on this episode, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. A friendly reminder to stay tuned for updates from the Brad McGarry Center for Neurodiversity at mercyhurst.edu/neurodiversity, or check the show notes for our social media handles. Thanks, and we'll talk again soon.